I pulled into my own driveway at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, and my son was standing at the front door like a bouncer at a club I wasn't welcome in anymore. Michael, 23 years old, the kid I taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball, looked at me with pure hatred in his eyes. "Don't come back, Dad," he said, his voice cold and final. "Just don't." Behind him through the living room window, I could see my ex-wife Linda with this little smile on her face, arms crossed like she'd just won the lottery. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. This was something else entirely, and I had no idea how deep it actually went. I'm Richard Morrison, 57 years old, and 8 months ago, my wife asked for a divorce after I confronted her about something I'd discovered. Actually, that's not true. I asked her for the divorce, but she's been telling everyone she left me. I'd been living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Shadyside, Pittsburgh, the kind of place where you can hear your neighbors sneeze through the walls. I only came back to the house that day because I needed some tax documents from the garage. Boring stuff, IRS audit paperwork that my accountant was screaming about. I thought Linda would be at work. I thought I could slip in, grab what I needed, and get out without drama. I was wrong about everything. "Michael, buddy, I just need to get some papers from the garage," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and calm, like I was talking to a scared animal. "5 minutes and I'll be gone." He shook his head, and I noticed his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "You can't just show up here whenever you want. Mom doesn't want you here, and honestly, neither do I." The way he said it, like I was some kind of stranger, some threat, made my chest feel tight. This was my son, the kid who used to wait by the window for me to come home from work, the kid who called me his hero when I fixed his bike chain or helped with his math homework. Now he was looking at me like I was something disgusting he'd stepped in on the sidewalk. "What did she tell you?" I asked. And even as the words came out, I knew I sounded desperate. "Michael, whatever your mother said about me, you need to hear my side of—" He cut me off with a sharp laugh that didn't sound like him at all. "Your side? Dad, she told me everything. About the money you've been hiding, about your girlfriend, some 25-year-old from your gym, about how you've been planning to screw us over for years." My brain went completely blank for a second, like someone had pressed a reset button. Money? Girlfriend? None of this was real. None of this had happened. "That's not true," I said, but my voice came out weak and unconvincing, even to my own ears. "Michael, I swear to you, none of that is true. The reason I wanted the divorce is because I found out." "Found out what?" Linda's voice came from behind Michael, and she stepped into view now, wearing that concerned expression she'd perfected over 26 years of marriage. "Found out that I was onto your schemes? That I'd discovered your secret accounts?" She looked at Michael with this wounded, brave expression that made me want to scream. "Your father has been very clever, sweetheart. Moving money offshore, setting up accounts I'm not supposed to know about. But I have a good lawyer, and we've been tracking it all." I felt like I was losing my mind. Offshore accounts? I barely understood how my 401k worked, let alone international banking. The only secret I discovered had nothing to do with money and everything to do with a lie so massive it had destroyed my entire understanding of our marriage. "Linda, stop," I said, and my voice came out louder than I intended, almost a shout. "Just stop lying to him. Tell him the truth. Tell him about your mother." Michael's face twisted with confusion and anger. "What about Grandma Margaret? She died when I was 3. What does that have to do with anything?" Linda's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. A flash of panic, maybe, or calculation. "Your father is trying to confuse you," she said smoothly. "He's going to tell you some insane story because he's desperate. Don't listen to him, Michael. He's not well." "Not well?" She was actually trying to make me sound crazy. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. "Your grandmother didn't die, Michael. She's alive. She lives in Florida. I can call her right now. You can talk to—" "Get out!" Michael moved toward me, actually stepped forward in a way that felt threatening, and I instinctively backed up. "Get out before I call the cops. I'm serious, Dad. You're not welcome here anymore." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw that he genuinely believed what Linda had told him. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't playing along. He actually thought I was the villain in this story. Linda had gotten to him first, and she'd done it so well that nothing I said would matter. I got back in my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled away, I saw Linda put her arm around Michael's shoulders, comforting him, playing the role of protective mother shielding her son from his terrible father. And that's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her win this, not without a fight. That night I called my lawyer, Patricia Chen, at almost 10 p.m. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear her lighting a cigarette in the background. "Richard, what happened?" I told her everything. The confrontation with Michael, the accusations about offshore accounts and girlfriends, the way Linda had completely turned my son against me with lies. Patricia was quiet for a long time after I finished talking. Then she said something that changed everything. "Richard, I need to tell you something I discovered 3 days ago. I've been going through Linda's financial disclosures for the divorce, standard procedure, looking at bank statements and asset declarations. Your wife has been moving money. A lot of money. But it's not you doing it. It's her." She paused and I heard her exhale smoke. "She's been transferring funds out of your joint accounts for at least 18 months, maybe longer. Small amounts at first, then bigger chunks. She's routing it through accounts in her sister's name, setting up what looks like a systematic plan to hide marital assets." I sat there in my depressing apartment with its view of a brick wall 8 feet away, trying to process what Patricia was telling me. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia sighed, and I heard papers rustling in the background. "So far, I can trace about $137,000, but I think there's more. Richard, your wife is accusing you of exactly what she's been doing. It's called projection. Narcissists do it all the time. They commit the crime, then they accuse you of it so convincingly that everyone believes them instead of you. $137,000. Linda had stolen that much from our marriage, from our joint accounts. And then she'd turned around and accused me of doing it. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive, in a horrible way. "What do we do?" I asked Patricia, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. "We build a case," she said, and now her voice had that sharp, focused quality that made me understand why she'd won so many divorce settlements. "We document everything, bank transfers, emails, text messages, anything that proves what she's been doing. And then we go to mediation with enough evidence that her lawyer will have no choice but to fold. But Richard, I need to ask you something. What's this about her mother being alive? You mentioned that before, and I didn't follow up because we were focused on the financial stuff." I took a deep breath and told her the whole story. How 8 months ago, I'd gotten a Facebook friend request from a woman named Margaret Callahan, Linda's maiden name. How I'd assumed it was a distant relative or someone with a common name. How Margaret's profile picture showed an elderly woman who looked exactly like the photos Linda kept in our wedding album. I'd sent a polite message. "Hi, I think you might have added me by mistake, but are you related to Linda Morrison?" She'd responded within an hour. "Linda is my daughter. Who is this?" I'd stared at that message for 10 full minutes, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be having a heart attack. Then I'd called the phone number listed on her Facebook profile. An elderly woman had answered, vibrant and sharp, asking who I was and how I knew her daughter. That's when I learned the truth. Margaret Callahan hadn't died of lung cancer in 2003 like Linda had told me. She'd been alive the entire time, living in a retirement community in Sarasota, Florida, playing bridge twice a week and taking watercolor painting classes. Linda had faked her own mother's death for 22 years. Patricia was silent for so long, I thought the call had dropped. "Say that again," she finally said, her voice tight. "Linda told you her mother died in 2003, and you just found out she's been alive this whole time?" I confirmed it, and Patricia let out a low whistle. "Richard, that's not just a lie. That's pathological. That's a pattern of deception so deep it suggests serious personality issues." Why did she do it? I explained what I'd learned from talking to Margaret. Linda's mother had disapproved of our marriage from the start, thought I was beneath her daughter, called me a blue-collar nobody with no prospects. Loud enough at our rehearsal dinner that half the guests heard it. Linda had been humiliated and angry, So instead of dealing with it, instead of setting boundaries or trying to repair the relationship, she'd simply erased her mother from existence. Told me Margaret had died, created elaborate stories about hospital vigils and final words, made me comfort her through fake anniversaries of a death that never happened. When I'd confronted Linda with the truth 8 months ago, shown her Margaret's Facebook profile, and told her I'd spoken to her mother on the phone, Linda hadn't apologized. She hadn't broken down or explained. She just looked at me with this cold, flat expression and said, "She was dead to me. What's the difference?" That's when I knew I couldn't stay married to her anymore. Not because of the lie itself, though that was insane enough, but because of how casually she'd maintained it. How easily she'd woven it into the fabric of our daily lives like it was nothing. If she could lie about something that big for that long, what else had she lied about? What else was I believing that wasn't real? Patricia was quiet again, thinking. "Okay," she said finally, "here's what we're going to do. We're going to document the financial fraud. That's straightforward. We have bank records. But we're also going to get Margaret involved. We need a sworn affidavit from her confirming she's alive and detailing Linda's deception. And we need to find out if Linda has been coaching Michael, feeding him lines about you." Over the next 3 weeks, Patricia and I built a case that would make a prosecutor jealous. We had bank statements showing every transfer Linda had made. We had emails between Linda and her sister Brenda discussing the emergency fund they were building, with specific references to keeping it hidden from the divorce proceedings. We had text messages where Linda explicitly talked about making sure Richard gets nothing and teaching him what happens when you cross me. Patricia also convinced me to hire a private investigator, a retired cop named Dennis who looked like he'd walked off the set of a 1970s cop show, complete with a thick mustache and a wardrobe that was 50% polyester. Dennis started following Linda, documenting her daily routine, checking into her claims. What he found made my blood boil and broke my heart at the same time. Linda had been telling people in our neighborhood, at our church, in our entire social circle, that I was emotionally abusive. Not physically abusive, she was too smart for that, but controlling, manipulative, financially domineering. She'd painted herself as the brave survivor, finally escaping a toxic marriage. And people had believed her because Linda was good at playing the victim. She'd even started seeing a therapist who specialized in domestic abuse survivors, building a paper trail that made her look sympathetic and me look like a monster. But Dennis found something even more damning. He found text messages between Linda and Michael where she was literally coaching him on what to say to me. "If your father contacts you, tell him you know about the money. Tell him you know about his girlfriend. Don't let him explain. He'll try to manipulate you." She'd written out entire scripts for Michael to follow, and he'd followed them perfectly because he trusted his mother. Why wouldn't he? She was his mom. She'd never given him a reason not to believe her, except she had over and over again, just not in ways he could see. The final piece came from Margaret herself. I'd been hesitant to involve her again after the disaster with Michael, but Patricia insisted. "She's the smoking gun," Patricia said. "She proves Linda's pattern of deception goes back decades. We need her testimony." I called Margaret one evening in early October, and we ended up talking for almost 3 hours. She was sharp, funny, deeply sad about what had happened. "I tried to reconcile with Linda over the years," Margaret told me, her voice crackling over the phone. "I sent letters, birthday cards, Christmas gifts for Michael. Linda returned everything unopened. I thought maybe she needed time, space to forgive me for the awful things I'd said. I never imagined she'd tell people I was dead. I never imagined I had a grandson out there who didn't know I existed." Margaret agreed to provide a notarized statement and photos proving she was alive. She also agreed to meet with Michael if the opportunity came up, though her voice broke when she said it. With all our evidence compiled, Patricia scheduled a formal mediation session for mid-November. These sessions usually involve both parties, their lawyers, and a neutral mediator trying to hash out settlements before going to actual court. Linda showed up looking confident, wearing a navy blue dress that made her look professional and sympathetic at the same time. She'd brought her lawyer, Mitchell Pearson, a guy who specialized in what he called protecting vulnerable women from predatory divorces, and had the kind of smugness that made me want to punch something. The mediation started with the usual procedural stuff from Ruth, the mediator, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd seen every possible variation of human marital dysfunction and was tired of all of it. Then Patricia opened her briefcase, and I saw Mitchell's expression change slightly, like he'd just sensed something bad coming. "Before we begin negotiations," Patricia said, her voice crisp and professional, "I'd like to present evidence that's recently come to light regarding asset distribution and conduct during the marriage." She slid a thick folder across the table to Mitchell and Ruth. Linda's face stayed neutral, but her fingers tightened on her chair armrest. A tiny tell that told me she was nervous. Patricia continued, and her voice had this edge of satisfaction to it that I'd never heard before. "These documents show systematic financial transfers from joint marital accounts into accounts controlled by Mrs. Morrison and her sister, Brenda Callahan. The transfers total approximately $137,000 over an 18-month period. We have email correspondence discussing hiding these assets from divorce proceedings. We have text messages where Mrs. Morrison explicitly states her intention to deprive Mr. Morrison of his fair share of marital property." Mitchell opened the folder, and I watched his face change as he read. The confident, aggressive posture deflated. He looked at Linda with barely suppressed annoyance, like a defense attorney realizing his client had lied to him about everything. Linda didn't crack immediately, though. She was too good for that. "Those transfers were for household expenses," she said smoothly, her voice steady. "Richard was controlling the finances, giving me barely enough for basic necessities. I had to—" Patricia cut her off with a smile that wasn't friendly at all. "Household expenses that required routing through your sister's account? Interesting. We have text messages between you and Brenda specifically discussing how to hide money from the divorce. Would you like me to read them aloud, or would you prefer to review them privately?" The room went completely silent. Ruth, the mediator, was looking at Linda with professional neutrality that somehow conveyed deep disappointment. Mitchell was rapidly flipping through pages, his jaw clenched tight. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, clearly enjoying herself now, "we have documented evidence that Mrs. Morrison has been engaged in parental alienation, systematically turning the couple's adult son against Mr. Morrison through deliberate misinformation. Text messages coaching the son on what to say, fabricated stories about affairs and financial crimes, all provably false." She pulled out another folder, and this one she placed directly in front of Linda. "And finally, we have this." Patricia laid out a notarized statement in several recent photographs. "This is a sworn affidavit from Margaret Callahan, Mrs. Morrison's mother, whom Mrs. Morrison claimed died in 2003. As you can see from the notarization date and the photographs, which are time-stamped and verified, Mrs. Callahan is very much alive. She's been alive for the entire duration of this marriage. Mrs. Morrison lied to her husband about her own mother's death for 22 years, maintaining an elaborate deception that included fake memorial services and fabricated death certificates." The look on Linda's face was something I'll never forget. It wasn't guilt or shame, it was pure rage. Someone had dared to expose her, to pull back the curtain on her carefully constructed lies, and she was furious about it. Her mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the real Linda underneath, cold, calculating, utterly self-centered. Mitchell closed the folder and turned to Linda. "I need to consult with my client privately," he said, his voice tight and controlled. They stepped out of the conference room, and I could hear raised voices through the door. Linda's high and defensive, Mitchell's low and angry, clearly telling her exactly how screwed she was. When they came back 15 minutes later, Linda looked smaller somehow, like she'd shrunk inside her navy blue dress. Mitchell cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his smugness was completely gone. "My client is prepared to agree to an equitable division of all remaining assets, including returning the transferred funds in full. She's also willing to agree to cease any negative communications regarding Mr. Morrison to family members, mutual acquaintances, or third parties." Patricia looked at me, and I nodded. It was more than I'd hoped for, honestly, but I wasn't finished yet. "I want her to tell Michael the truth," I said, looking directly at Linda for the first time since the mediation started. I want you to tell our son that you lied about everything. The money, the girlfriend that doesn't exist, your mother, all of it. Linda's eyes filled with tears, but they looked fake to me now, theatrical. I was protecting him, she said, her voice breaking in that practiced way. You wanted to destroy our family, Richard. I was just trying to help Michael understand why you were abandoning us. Ruth, the mediator, intervened before I could respond. Mrs. Morrison, I cannot mandate disclosure to adult children as part of a divorce settlement. However, I strongly encourage you to consider the long-term implications. Deception of this magnitude will eventually surface, and the damage to your relationship with your son could be permanent. The mediation ended with Linda signing agreements to return every penny she'd stolen and split all remaining assets 50-50. She didn't agree to tell Michael the truth, but she did agree to stop spreading lies about me. It felt like a partial victory. I'd protected myself financially and legally, but I'd still lost my son in the process. At least that's what I thought at the time. I had no idea what was about to happen next and how everything was about to change in a way I never saw coming. 3 days after the mediation, I was sitting in my apartment, eating leftover Chinese food and watching a Steelers game when my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I'd been getting spam calls constantly, but something made me pick up. Dad? Michael's voice came through, soft and uncertain, nothing like the angry voice that had told me to leave. Michael, I said, my heart suddenly racing. Are you okay? There was a long pause and I could hear him breathing, gathering courage for something. Aunt Brenda called me today, he said finally, and his voice cracked on the words. She told me about the money, about the accounts Mom set up in her name. She said she felt sick about it, said she couldn't keep lying anymore. She said you weren't the one hiding money. Mom was. Is that true? I closed my eyes, feeling relief wash over me like a physical sensation. Yes, I said simply. It's true. Another long pause, and then I heard it, my son starting to cry, these soft, broken sounds that made my own eyes fill with tears. She lied to me, Michael said, his voice small and hurt like he was a child again. She told me all these things about you, and I believed her. I said horrible things to you, Dad. I told you not to come back to your own house. I believed every word she said, and it was all lies. My throat felt tight, and I had to swallow hard before I could speak. Michael, you trusted your mother. That's not wrong. That's what you're supposed to do. She's the one who broke that trust, not you. You didn't do anything wrong. We talked for over an hour that night. I told him everything, about finding Margaret alive, about Linda's decades of deception, about the stolen money and the fake accusations. Michael told me about the conversations Linda had been having with him, how she'd slowly built up this narrative of me as the villain, adding details over weeks and months until it felt completely real. She showed me what she said was proof, Michael said, disbelief heavy in his voice. Bank statements with your name on them, printouts of emails you supposedly sent to some woman named Melissa. I can't believe I didn't question it. I can't believe I didn't even ask you for your side. I thought about Melissa. The only Melissa I knew from my gym was a 60-year-old retired nurse who occasionally asked me to spot her on the leg press and talked endlessly about her 5 grandchildren. Your mother is very good at what she does, I said carefully. She understands how to build a believable story, how to manipulate perception. You're not stupid for believing her, Michael. You're human. We made plans to have dinner the following week, just the two of us, and I called Margaret to arrange for her to fly up to Pittsburgh to meet her grandson for the first time in his life. Margaret cried when I told her, happy tears that made me realize how much pain Linda's lies had caused across multiple generations of our family. The day Michael met Margaret, I picked them both up and drove to a quiet Italian restaurant in Oakland. Margaret had flown in the night before, staying at a hotel downtown, nervous and excited in equal measure about meeting her grandson. When Michael walked into the restaurant and saw her sitting at our table, I watched his face transform. There was recognition there, something genetic and deep, an acknowledgement that this woman was family even though they'd never met. They hugged for a long time, both of them crying, and I stepped back to give them space and privacy for a moment that should have happened 23 years ago. Over lunch, Margaret told stories about Linda as a child, family vacations to the Outer Banks, Christmas mornings with too many presents, the time Linda had insisted on adopting a stray cat and had hidden it in her closet for 3 days before Margaret found it. Ordinary, beautiful details of a life that Linda had erased as completely as she could. Michael listened with this expression of wonder mixed with sadness, like he was discovering a whole hidden wing of a house he'd been living in his entire life. "Why did she do it?" he asked Margaret at one point, his voice quiet. "Why did she tell everyone you were dead?" Margaret considered the question carefully, her weathered hands folded on the white tablecloth. "I said some terrible things when she married your father," Margaret admitted, her voice steady but sad. "I was worried about money, about stability, about whether Richard could provide the kind of life I wanted for my daughter. I was wrong, and I was cruel in how I expressed those concerns. But instead of confronting me, instead of working through it like adults, Linda just cut me out, completely. And once she'd told that first lie about me being dead, every year that passed made it harder to take back. The lie became easier than the truth, until eventually the lie became her truth." "That's insane," Michael said quietly, shaking his head. "It's not insane," Margaret corrected gently, and there was wisdom in her eyes that came from decades of thinking about this. "It's human. Humans are capable of extraordinary self-deception when the alternative is admitting we were wrong. Linda chose deception over reconciliation, and she chose it so many times that it became her default setting for handling conflict. She doesn't know how to be wrong, so she reconstructs reality until she's right." The conversation eventually turned lighter. Margaret wanted to know everything about Michael's life, his job at the marketing startup, his girlfriend Emma, who I'd only met twice, but who seemed like a genuinely good person. They exchanged phone numbers and email addresses, making plans for Margaret to visit again at Christmas, maybe meet Emma properly. Watching them together, seeing two people who should have known each other for 23 years finally getting that chance, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Genuine happiness, not relief or vindication, but actual joy. As we were leaving the restaurant, Michael pulled me aside while Margaret was getting her coat from the check room. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for not giving up on me, for fighting to tell me the truth even when I wouldn't listen. Even when I said those horrible things to you." I hugged him, really hugged him, and it felt like hugging my son for the first time in years instead of the stranger who'd blocked me from my own house. "You're my kid," I said into his shoulder. "That doesn't change just because your mom lied to you about me. That never changes." The next few months brought more revelations that honestly didn't even surprise me anymore. Patricia called in January to tell me Linda had been fired from her job for falsifying expense reports and was potentially facing charges. Apparently, the pattern of deception extended far beyond our marriage. It was just how Linda operated in the world, bending reality to fit her needs. Michael maintained some contact with Linda, though their relationship was strained and superficial now. Awkward phone calls on birthdays, the occasional tense dinner where they talked about weather and current events but never about what had happened. He built a real relationship with Margaret, though, visiting her in Florida twice and calling her every Sunday evening like clockwork. Emma, his girlfriend, became a regular part of our weekly dinners, and she and Margaret bonded over a shared love of painting. Last month, Michael told me he was planning to propose to Emma, and he wanted both me and Margaret there when he did it. We're planning a trip to Acadia National Park in Maine, Emma's favorite place, where Michael will ask her to marry him on a cliff overlooking the ocean at sunset. Margaret is already planning the wedding in her head, talking about flowers and venues with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time. And me? I'm just grateful. Grateful that the truth came out before the damage became permanent. Grateful for Brenda's guilty conscience that finally made her tell Michael what was really happening. Grateful for Patricia and Dennis and Margaret and everyone who helped expose Linda's lies. I think sometimes about that moment in my driveway when Michael told me not to come back, when I thought I'd lost him forever to Linda's manipulation. I think about how close we came to that being our final interaction, how easily it could have gone the other way if Brenda hadn't called, if Michael hadn't been willing to question what he'd been told. The truth is, I don't hate Linda anymore. I don't wish her well, but I don't wish her harm either. I just wish she'd get help, though I know she probably never will, because that would require admitting she needs it. She moved to Arizona last I heard, starting over somewhere. Nobody knows the full story. Michael asked me once if I regretted the marriage, all 26 years of it. I told him the truth. I regretted the lies, the manipulation, the wasted years believing in something that wasn't real. But I didn't regret the marriage itself because the marriage gave me him, and having him in my life was worth everything else. That's what I've learned through all of this. Truth matters. It might take time to emerge. It might be painful and messy when it does, but eventually truth wins. The lies Linda told were elaborate and maintained with impressive dedication, but they couldn't survive contact with reality. Facts are stubborn things, and in the end, facts always win.